Welcome back to Church and Society. This is an appendix episode to our series on Church and Society for Church and the world in general. And this is not concerned with the ELCA's social statement from 1991 directly. This is concerned with kind of how we got there using the example of Martin Luther himself. Martin Luther, for those of you who don't know anything about his biography, you really should look it up, but Luther was a 16th century monk turned priest and reformer who, how can we say it, thought that there was a departure from the centrality of the gospel within the Roman Catholic Church, which at that time he would have just called the church because there was no other church to which anyone had access. It was just the church. And Luther was concerned that there seemed to be a misunderstanding and error in focus within the church. And as he started to kind of pull at that thread, he came across really just this intense misunderstanding from his perspective about what Christianity even was. And as such, he started a reform movement intended to realign the Roman Church around the gospel. What happened, of course, was that Luther and his supporters were functionally excommunicated. Luther was literally excommunicated by a papal bull. Exsurge Domine, I believe, was the title of it. And that excommunicated Martin Luther for his attempts to recenter the church around what he saw as the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? So Lutherans didn't leave the Roman Church. Lutherans got kicked out. We call ourselves Lutherans against Luther's specific instructions, by the way, because in America, when we got here, the word evangelical didn't communicate to people who we were. But evangelical was what Luther's followers called themselves in Germany and in other Northern European countries. And still to this day, many nations in Europe will have evangelical churches. And what's meant by that is Lutheran, what in America we call Lutherans, not what Americans call evangelicals, which is a whole other diatribe that I'm not going to get into unless somebody from an evangelical background interfaces with me to keep me honest. But that evangelicals, as you think of them, if you're an American, that is not a thing. That is a very recent invention that has all sorts of its own very specific historical origins and problems, which we're not going to go into. Martin Luther, as it turns out, who was, remember, living in the 16th century, believed that he had both a right and an office and an obligation to engage with social questions of the day. Here's an example. This is from a letter that he specifically writes. He addresses it to the councilmen of all cities in Germany. It's a pretty wide audience, one would think. And he says, among other things, this. My dear sirs, if we have to spend such large sums every year on guns, roads, bridges, dams, and countless similar items to ensure the temporal peace and prosperity of a city, why should not much more be devoted to the poor, neglected youth, at least enough to engage one or two competent men to teach school? Notice what Luther is doing here. Luther is specifically advocating for a change in local budgets for the purposes of making education available to those who can't afford to pay for it themselves. Does this sound like a conversation that could have been ripped out of American politics? Yes. Why? Because it is. It is a conversation that we keep having as a society, which is namely how to invest and in whom. That's a moral deliberation question, and it's something that Luther specifically engaged with, not just by preaching sermons about it, though he did, and not just by teaching about why the church believes what it believes or teaches what it teaches, although he did, but in specifically writing letters to political figures, telling them what they should be doing. Why? Because he was a teacher of the church, and that's what teachers of the church do. But today I want to talk about why Luther thought that Christians should care about governance, right? You may be thinking or have thought in the process of this church and society study, well, but why do we need government? Doesn't Jesus tell us to share everything, et cetera, et cetera? Yes, great. Luther actually ran into this problem in his own time, and in this work, this is on temporal authority and why it, and to what extent it should be obeyed. And that's I'm quoting from Timothy F. Lull's Martin Luther's Basic Theological Writings, second edition. That's Lull's translation, therefore. This is the text I used to write papers on these topics in seminary, and that's why I'm using it here. It's easier because it's already dog-eared and underlined, and all that chicken scratches in here already. Luther then is talking about those who have read Matthew 5, right? That Jesus has taught us that we really shouldn't need political figures to police us. We shouldn't need laws. We're Christians. We should just love one another, and that should pretty much answer all our questions right there. Luther says this is absolutely right? In a community that's only people formed totally by the gospel and that are only obedient to the gospel, what's the point of the law? You won't need it. You'll do what's right automatically. You'll do what's loving automatically. But then Luther says, note well, Jesus does not, however, forbid one to serve and be subject to those who do have the secular sword and the law. Rather, since you do not need it and should not have it, you are to serve all the more those who have not attained to such heights as you, and who therefore do still need it. Right? So Luther's point here is, wait a second. Okay, great. You're enlightened. You don't need laws about property ownership. You don't need police officers to keep the peace. You don't need legislation for divorce because you're never going to need it. Great. Then you should really be working to help the people who do need it, don't you think? Why aren't you being compassionate for those who aren't in that situation? Interesting, right? Already we see an outline of a politics as church, that the church's politic, our church political activity, is always asking the question, well, okay, so you don't need this. So why aren't we worried about the people who do? Like, where is this coming from? Namely, position of privilege. I don't need that, so why should I care? Well, because you care about the people who do need it. Genius. That is a very basic political idea in the church, and it is contrary to so much political ideology that's popular in North America right now that it really needs to be considered. Right? Well, you need to consider those who have not attained such things and who do still need these things. Although you do not need to have your enemy punished, your afflicted neighbor does. You should help him that he may have peace and that his enemy may be curbed, but this is not possible unless the governing authority is honored and feared. Christ does not say you shall not serve the governing authority or be subject to it, but rather do not resist evil, as much as to say, behave in such a way that you bear everything, so that you may not need the governing authority to help you and serve you or be beneficial or essential for you, but that you in turn may help and serve it, being beneficial and essential to it. I would have you be too exalted and far too noble to have any need of it, namely the government. It should rather have need of you. Interesting. Luther turns the tables, right? Luther doesn't want the church to be dependent on the government, doesn't want Christians to be dependent on the government, but wants the government to be in need of what Christians do, right? This goes back to baptismal vocation, which I talked about in video 5, right? And being a community of moral deliberation, also in video 5, and the church's commitments in video 6 on church and society. The church is in society for the good of the society. The church engages the government for the good of the government. The government doesn't know what the heck it's doing. Are you kidding me? Human beings, randomly elected by popular vote, are not going to be equipped to engage in the level of moral deliberation the church does. So the church needs people to talk to those folks and help them. We need you, dear Christian, to be needed by the government, which means we need to equip you such that the government will need what you have to offer in your baptismal vocation, whether that's as a lawyer or a judge or an advocate or a police officer or whatever else, so that you can help reform the government in the same way Luther tried to reform the church. Luther believed the government had gone wrong too. And Luther believed that princes, which is at the time what the government structure was, it was all kind of, it was nothing like a representative democracy that we have now. But Luther still believed that the church had to produce people to correct and instruct those who conducted governance, because otherwise the governance would go all over the place and wind up becoming really corrupt and really evil. It would wind up crushing the poor people one way or another, or neglecting the poor people. Luther didn't want that. Luther thought that we had to be such in the world that the world recognized or realized that it needed the voice of the church in order to do its job, right? The government needs the church to do its job rightly because no one else understands what the government's for correctly. That's not a statement of intellectual superiority. It's just a belief that the church believes that the government is something the government doesn't always realize it is. Right? The government is not there. What's one of the classic American arguments? The government's there to provide for the common defense and promote general liberty. Right? So, in other words, armies and the government can also make sure that property laws in some sense are enforced so that commerce can occur, and that's it. No, the government has to do things beyond that. Why? Because there are people who are going to starve in that system. There are people who are going to be murdered. There are people who are going to suffer any number of problems. And the government has to address those because the government's office is not just to provide a social framework of rules and then whatever happens, happens. But the government is there to provide for the weak person, the vulnerable person, and to provide protection and resources for those people. That's what governance is actually for. And we know that because Luther defines government based off of the fourth commandment. Honor your father and your mother. Luther wants us as Christians to advocate towards the government such that the government sees itself not as an institution that has to negotiate the politics of the country, but rather as a group of people who are there to play mother, father, parent to all the rest of the citizens of the country, all the people in the country, right? And that means first and foremost loving and caring for their welfare, even if it's at the politician's expense. I want you to imagine a world where every Christian in the United States of America constantly reminded the representatives and public officials that they are in those positions to care for us as a loving parent cares for their child. So not screaming at them, not threatening their lives, not all this political wrangling that is about power, but reminding them over and over again, you were put in that office to love the people that you serve. That's why you're there. And if you can't do that there, then you need to not be in that office. Not because I disagree with your policies, though I may, but because you are not able to love the people and serve them as a parent serves their child. Not for their own benefit, but for the child's. So that's my appendix on kind of the origins of public advocacy, of the church being engaged with political authority as Lutherans see it, rooted in the writings of Martin Luther himself. Those are some quotes there, and that's from On Temporal Authority, To What Extent It Should Be Obeyed, and a letter to the councilmen of all cities in Germany that they should ordain and establish and fund schools, right? So that's the two works that I drew from. There's, of course, many more examples, and we can go. Luther is, of course, widely documented, heavily complicated, but that's just a little bit of grounding for my evangelical Lutheran listeners into why this is actually part of our DNA as a denomination, as Christians of our particular stripe in this nation and in the world. So I hope that's helpful. Today's Sunday. Tomorrow, we will start on Monday with part one of our discussion of the ELCA's 1991 social statement on abortion. Very difficult topic, very complicated topic, a lot going on there. I'm going to try to present a summary as quickly and efficiently as possible while drawing on all these theological assumptions. So, if you get lost there, and you like, wait, why can we do this? Hopefully this has created some resource for you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you'll do so again. Until then, God bless and take care.